Oh, hello, I'm Tootight Lautrec, and welcome back to the Shakey Sonnet Show. Here we are in the Sonnetarium again at the bottom of the down staircase in the permanently sequestered remainders section of an unnamed local library which may or may not have a lion couchant or two on the steps, just waiting for you to stop by and say hello. We are back in business for our sonnet project. We've done the first 17 and now we're going to do the rest. The orderlies in the Sonnetarium are all, their uniforms are all starched and crisp as we embark again on our insane adventure of trying to discuss every single one of Shakespeare's 154 sonnets, with a few changes. Now, while I strenuously advocate the memorization and performance of poetry, as you know, my channel is based on poetry lip syncs and delivering poetry to you from memory, while I still advocate that, I've found that I'm no longer as smart or as young or as quick as I once deluded myself I was. So I'll no longer be performing the sonnets, I'll simply be presenting the sonnets once a week for you, and there will be no more performances of memorized sonnets. And I have to thank Dr. Frankensonnet for that breakthrough, and I've freed up one more day of your week for you. So we'll be discussing all of the sonnets from here on out, and today's sonnet will be Sonnet 18, which we are now, that the first 17 are behind us, we are free from all that nonsense about procreation. Or are we? I think we are. But Sonnet 18 is all about love, all about summer, all about the bloom of youth, and it's just in time for that completely made-up holiday, Valentine's Day. So, if you've been following along, you'll remember that the first 17 sonnets are arranged in such a way that they create this story where it seems like the only way for the narrator or narrators to convince the youth or youths that their beauty and intelligence and nobility will be passed down through all of history is by procreation. And it also seems that the narrator or narrators are more and more and more, and more than just a little, enamored of the subject or the subjects of these poems, or so it seems. So again, we're faced with these questions. Do we know, in fact, if the narrator is Shakespeare himself? No, we do not. Do we know for certain if the subject of the poems is male or female? Not always. Do we know if these sonnets are meant to be read individually, or as if they're part of a series, a cohesive series, or maybe even like a little novel in sonnets? Well, we're still trying to find that out. We're only at Sonnet 18, so it's hard to say, but it seems like some themes are coming together slowly. And lastly, do we have any idea why a grown man might put on a dress, fashion a fabulous fascinator to put in his wonderful wig and cover himself in glitter simply to talk about every last one of Shakespeare's sonnets? Well, we may never know. Nevertheless, she persisted. So, Sonnet 18, I'm going to set my quill down for a moment so I can organize myself just a little itsy bit better. Sonnet 18 starts out with a question. It's probably one of the most famous sonnets. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? And I don't know why it's taken me 18 sonnets to realize this, but Shakespeare does this frequently. He starts out sonnets with a question. He's done it in Sonnet 4, 8, 9, 16, and 17, and now he's done it in 18. And it creates this question, creates the effect of maybe a dialogue You can see there's sort of a call and response sort of thing that could be staged if one were to stage all of the sonnets. And there could be one character over here and another character over here, and they would be questioning each other and answering each other. And I could see this kind of a stage play with call and response with any variety of characters, with men, with women, with young, with old, with highbrow, with lowbrow, or some, much like myself, really quite off-brow. It could be any kind of people, and we could have a real hoot staging that, I think. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Sonnet 18, this question that comes in, shall I compare thee to a summer's day? It's somewhat flirtatious, somewhat rhetorical, but it almost seems to ask permission, at least for a second anyway, and it does seem to imply a previous conversation, a conversation that may have ended with the other question, how much do you love me? And then this could be the response. And then of course we get this properly hyperbolic, over-the-top sonnet about the beloved and the praises of the beloved. So let's take a closer look at Sonnet 18, and I'll read it through once and then we'll go through the particulars to see just what is going on here. Sonnet 18. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is his gold complexion dimmed. And every fair from fair sometime declines by chance or nature's changing course untrimmed. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou owest. Nor shall death brag, thou wanderest in his shade, when in eternal lines to time thou growest. So long as men can breathe, or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. So here we have the same kind of sonnet that we've seen before, and then this twist at the end where you expect, and then have a baby to carry your line and beauty down to the ages. We have this turn of events where Shakespeare says, in fact, I'm a poet. This will immortalize you. You don't need anything else. So it's also one of the most straightforward of Shakespeare's poems, I think. And if we go through it line by line, we'll see that. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Well, two people laying about on the grass, and someone says, this is the most beautiful thing in my life, this summer's day. And the other person begins to compare the person. Except that it's a comparison by negatives. A summer's day is not as lovely or as temperate as you are. Thou art more lovely and more temperate. And while rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, the wind comes by and shakes the leaves, you're pretty steady. You're my steady Freddy, Betty. And summer's lease hath all too short a date. Summer's here, summer's gone, poof, goodbye. You're here to stay, and I'm here for you. Sometime, here we go with the second quatrain, and we continue on this definition of the beloved by negative comparisons to a summer day. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines. Sometimes I just can't take the heat, but with you, I'm okay. And often is his gold complexion dimmed. Clouds come by, the shadows come, but you're always sunny. And every fair from fair sometime declines. Things that seem fair end up aging and going away, or a summer's day ends up ending, and by nature it declines. By chance or nature's changing course, untrimmed. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou owest. You will be fair forever, you will be beautiful forever in my eyes. you will be just like this summer day, this moment that we have right now, right here. This is how you will be forever. Nor shall death brag thou wanderest in his shade, when in eternal lines to time thou growest. Now, here there is a slight suggestion of procreation because, you know, the idea that death can't brag that he's gotten you is all well and good, but the way that this person will be saved is in eternal lines to time, which could mean a genetic line. It's possible that it could mean a genetic line, and it's possible that this could be setting up a couplet where Shakespeare says, and so in eternal lines to time thou growest. So in other words, you need to procreate, we're expecting. You need to procreate to make this happen. But Shakespeare pulls the old switcheroo and changes these lines. Eternal lines, it turns out, is not the genetic line. It's these lines that he's written. When in eternal lines to time thou growest, you will come through time in these lines that I've written. So long as men can breathe, or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. So, Shakespeare, enamored of himself as a poet too, and enamored of, the narrator, I should say, is enamored of himself as the poet, and the subject, of course, couldn't help be flattered, I'm sure. So one thing about this, so long as men can breathe, their eyes can see, which I found somewhat interesting. I told you last series that I was reading Elaine Scarry's book, Naming Thy Name, in which she talks about how she believes, or she puts forth the theory that Shakespeare and another poet named Henry Constable, who wrote the sonnet series Diana, are talking to one another in their sonnets, and so much so that we even see Henry Constable's name in some of Shakespeare's lines. Like, for instance, you can find each and every letter of Henry Constable's name in the line, so long as men can breathe or eyes can see, which is really quite interesting. And she goes on to say that, her name is not in these lines, but in fact, while she's going on through her theory, it seems to become a little less and less clear what she's talking about, and her argument doesn't necessarily hold up all the way through. And if one does think about it, the name Henry Constable might not be such a very difficult name to hide in a sonnet. If you have the word constant, or you have anything that ends with the word able, like comfortable or insatiable or something like that, and HEN, if you have when, which appears in Shakespeare's lines all the time, you're going to have the letters available to you. So Henry Constable isn't necessarily the most difficult name to hide in a sonnet or in any line. And I was wondering what to make of all of this when I ran across this wonderful review of Elaine Scarry's Naming Thy Name in the Los Angeles Review of Books by a scholar named Matthew Harrison, who is at West Texas A&M. He's a Shakespearean scholar. And in his review in the Los Angeles Review of Books, Matthew Harrison says, "To piece together the plot of a sonnet sequence often feels like reading by the light of a thunderstorm. Momentary flashes illumine and then vanish. A single poem opens with brilliant intimacy as we feel the quaver of emotions behind one piece of rhetoric, which then vanishes into the next, with its new metaphors and new situation. Between the two lies what comic artists call the gutter, a blank space which allows our minds to invent moment." Well, if I'm devoted to anything, I'm devoted to bringing the gutter to you. And I do feel that this is an incredibly interesting observation, and That is exactly what our project is all about. We are attempting to create some sort of a narrative for ourselves so that we can understand these sonnets. And we might as well go all in and create all sorts of fancies. We know, for instance, that Oscar Wilde did the same thing. I talked about this, I think, in my introduction, where he wrote this. This is an actual book of fiction, The Portrait of Mr. W.H., and his narrator goes on to concoct this theory of who Mr. W.H. is and what it means, and that Shakespeare was in love, etc., etc. And it was really wonderful. It's a great read, and it's a bunch of silliness, but it's an intense view of the sonnets, and it's an intense reading of the sonnets, and it brings the whole series to life. And Elaine Scarry, I can only applaud for attempting to do the same thing. This poses as scholarship, but again, it would have to fall into the realm of fiction, because it would be better if she had given some sort of a narrative arc to it that was more satisfying, the way Oscar Wilde did. And yet, I encourage anyone to create any sort of system by which we can understand these sonnets better. Which brings us to the question, what do we know about Sonnet 18? Could this be, is the speaker a man or a woman? Could the subject be a man or a woman? It seems like it could be a man to a man to a woman to a man, a woman to a woman, or even a parent to a child. A parent to a child, I could see that this could be the way, and I also could see that there's a case for saying that there is procreation, a procreation theme in this as well. But at least we have now a poet who steps up to the plate and says, damn it, I'm a poet, and yes, you can go off and procreate if that's your thing, but you've always got my poems to stand by to immortalize you forever and ever and ever. So, tell me what you think about Sonnet 18. Do you have some sort of staging that might be an interesting kind of staging that would be a different set of characters than I've described? Let me know. Sonnet 19 next week may have a little bit of a surprise in store for us. We'll see. We'll see if this new track that we're on is going to continue on unabated, or if there will be something else for us to think about in Sonnet 19. Until then, if you've been watching me, and if you don't, all you have to do is stop and look around yourself to see that the world is full of wonder. And your only job is to pay attention. Until we meet again, I'm Tootight Lautrec.